Welcome back, Honors. So, like we agreed, right? It's currently 6:45 in the morning. As you can see, still dark outside. We are going to pick up right where we left off in class and let the presentations keep rolling today, right? Like we've already talked about, we're like ahead of the midterm, which is awesome right now. Except I'm kind of the teacher that likes to just keep pushing, right? Just to keep getting after it. Give us more time at the end of the year, so that way none of us feel like we have like our backs against a wall. All right. So now, like we talked about in class yesterday, Italy, of course, still divided into many small city-states. However, they were all still connected to the papal state, which is the big chunk in the middle. And there's the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies down the bottom, but they're mostly agrarian, right? Now, it's the current world center for banking in the mid-1400s as well, mainly by one family we're about to talk about. And then as well, you have the fact that like patronage is going to stem heavily from Italy. This is again why Italy. When we were asking the question yesterday, we were like, why Italy? Why was Italy the home of the Renaissance in the earliest phases? Why not the Holy Roman Empire? There was money there. Why not England? There was money there. Why not any of those other places? Well, a lot of it has to do with, of course, like I said, the fact that it was the home of the former Roman Empire, that it's still divided and economically competing with one another. It's the world center for banking, and also there's a heavy amount of patrons there, right? Also, really, really quick, speaking of financial supporters, finance, the Renaissance gave it power. Patronage, another big patron as well. I want you to just write this down. The Catholic Church. Nicholas V is many times considered the Renaissance Pope, who actually began to push to beautify churches and put gigantic, huge frescoes inside of them, and then developed like chapels to be bigger and better than they ever had been, rounded edges instead of the old Gothic architecture, stuff like that. But this particular house from Florence is pretty much the best example of patronage systems in Italy at the time. And they are called the Medici, right? The Medici, not the Medici, the Medici, right? So most of you are actually presenting on a Medici-funded artwork. Oh, where would we all be without coffee? Now, the Medici family were both the informal and formal rulers at one time of Florence for over 300 years, right? They created the most powerful bank in Europe, and they were huge patrons of major artworks, which kind of led them to be giving Florence the title of the cradle of the Renaissance, right? So they're going to keep pushing things forward, all led by several different members. Of course, I don't ever know what his name is, but that's Cosimo the Elder, and this is his son Pietro, I think so. And then Lorenzo, of course, also known as Il Magnifico, is right here, who actually, this guy particularly, Lorenzo Medici, actually let Michelangelo stay in his home, financed philosophers, he bought the David when it was done, right? Like, so amazing, amazing family that actually paid for quite a bit of stuff in the area of the Renaissance, right? And especially that of Florence. Now, one of them actually was called the Gouty, and he actually wasn't a very, very solid ruler because he spent most of it in his bed because he had gout in his feet. I think it's like Pietro II. Now, anyway, so the big thing about the Renaissance too, when you're actually discussing it, is you got to discuss like how the art's just going to leap forward, right? And new artistic styles are going to pop up, much more stylized. And what I mean by stylized is things are done with a purpose. Artists themselves have particular styles that let them trademark ideas and showed their abilities. And like when you would see a Michelangelo, you're like, that's a Michelangelo, right? More stylized as well as in things are placed everywhere for a reason, and the composition of the piece became far more important. Now, also, new art during the Renaissance period is going to represent humans and landscapes and backgrounds and depth and actually try to make appropriately anatomically correct versions of people, right? They're going to also use perspective, which is like real life art with depth and proportions, etc. Shading is going to make art look more textured and real, and then sculptors are even going to use their abilities to study human anatomy to make the bodies actually look that of a marble human, right? Or a bronze human if you're Donatello. All right, so to show you a couple of pictures, this is what we're talking about. So this, of course, this piece is that of who? Good job, Gianna. Big Rome fan over there. That's Augustus, right? It's Octavian Caesar, okay? This is actually following one of his major military campaigns, and he is pointing off into the distance as the extent of the Roman Empire, right? Showing the divine influence of the gods, like right here, strapped to his leg, of course, little Cupid down there. Everything is placed on this thing for a reason. He's wearing military armor to signify his idea as the imperator, right? The leading general. And, of course, his stance, he's proportioned. He actually is moving a little bit to try and imply some type of motion, right? Now, this particular sculpture was made in the neighborhood of probably early hundreds AD. Let me double check that really quick. Augustus. It was discovered in 1863. Yeah, 1st century CE. Sweet. So anyway, now this major piece, though, is to this day now almost 2,000 years old, right? So, like, very, very old. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. This piece, far earlier, this is from the 1100s AD. Look at the lack of depth, all right? Look at the lack of depth. Look at the lack of proportional sizing. Look at the lack of three-dimensional characters. This, of course, being a Middle Ages piece, right? Now, this right here is a Byzantine piece, okay? So, looking at this particular piece, you see the heavy use of gold instead of pigments. You see also proportional figures. You see the fact that Christ and Mary kind of have the same face. The eyes are much, much more large in this particular piece. Basically, the entire thing looks almost out of proportion. But then we fast forward back into the Renaissance again. This is the early Renaissance. This is Hercules actually killing this one of the centaurs, right? So, very, very prominent piece. Look at the sculpture itself showing actual human lifelike proportions. This is a Renaissance piece. And then as we keep going, another Renaissance piece. Some of you are like, that one's mine, that one's mine. You're right, we'll get to that one later. And this, of course, is another Renaissance piece. This is one of my favorite ones. This is actually Botticelli's Lady with Pomegranate, right? So, this particular one, though, trying to show the divine, right of Mary, okay? This is an oil-on-oak panel, okay? Oil painting on oak panel. And this is one of Botticelli's earlier works. It's actually commissioned by the household of the Medici as well. And this is trying to show the choirs of angels behind her. Of course, the Bible, the biblical text actually symbolizing her intelligence and her divine, what's the word I'm looking for? Divine ominence? I don't know. All right, so what her divine presence, okay? And then also right here, that is actually Gabriel holding a lily, trying to show her chasteness, right, and her purity. And then, of course, right here we've got little baby Jesus. Now, we'll get to him in a second, though. Now, also, you can see the really, really faint lines of the halo in the back. You can see the fact that Botticelli actually tried to incorporate sheer and see-through clothing into a painting, which is very, very difficult to do. And then also, last but not least, you can also see little baby Jesus, right? So looking at the infant Christ, though, a lot of you will notice that there's one major symbol standing out in your face, the pomegranate, right? So why a pomegranate? Why? Well, the pomegranate apparently actually was meant to symbolize the fact that pomegranates, when they open up, hundreds of little red seeds will fall out, right? So the pomegranate placed over this area of the Sacred Heart of the child that will one day be crucified to save all mankind, that pomegranate, each red seed inside of it, is supposed to symbolize a drop of blood that this child will one day spill to save us all. Ooh, very heavy symbolism right there, right? Good, good stuff. But you can tell this is one of his, considered one of Botticelli's more minor works, and it's still chock full of symbolism, right? There's tons and tons and tons of stuff. We already just got started talking about this stuff yesterday, right? We were talking about architecture, the social art, right? So it's called the social art as being the art that we can all share with one another due to the fact that they're constantly in the public eye, right? You don't go into a building to see a museum of a building, right? You see a building from the street level. Now, it did away with the Gothic style, right? It's going to move away from the Gothic style and bring back arches, pillars, domes, more Greek and Roman styles of architecture. Now, some of you will be like, well, I thought that Romanesque architecture actually predated Gothic architecture, and that's Roman. You're not wrong, but a lot of that, I feel, as a historian, has more to do with the fact that Romanesque architecture was simpler to build due to the fact that they had many examples of Roman-style buildings in their presence while they were making Romanesque architecture, right? Gothic architecture was a huge lurch forward, and it actually was a very, very big departure from Romanesque architecture. Of course, using its pointed ceilings, spires, flying buttresses, rose windows, stained glass, vaulted ceilings, natural lighting, right? But then we moved to things like this, like we started talking about yesterday, Brunelleschi's dome, right? Curved lines. Architecturally difficult to build as well. due to the fact that this dome, naturally, as the boys will talk about today, wants to collapse. It wants to collapse, right? Due to the force actually pushing down on the top of it, right? So this also is actually the piece inside of the dome itself. I'll be showing that today probably as well. And here we go. So here's another major piece, though. Some people would actually argue that, well, Mr. Terry, why are you waiting to bring up the writings of the Renaissance that actually, in a sense, inspired the entire movement? Why are you waiting to bring them up last? I like to talk about them specifically, right? I bring these guys up last because I like to talk about them more on their own so you can get a better understanding of the strive for intelligence, right? So the writings of the Renaissance came far before the visual arts, the sculptures, the paintings, the frescoes, the buildings, right? These writings actually came before that and demonstrated the growth of intelligence. But the issue is like when you're looking at the Renaissance, visual aids of art are far better for explaining it to John Q. Public about the Renaissance, right? The writings, on the other hand, are a little bit more difficult because you got to talk about the author, and then you also got to talk about the message of his pieces, right? Now, the writings, though, are going to begin to bring back the ideas of philosophy, scholarly articles, that of study, right? They're going to write guidance books for men and women on how to achieve success. They're also going to grow the depth of, like, intelligence. Started off by your big and your bad, St. Thomas Aquinas, right? St. Thomas Aquinas was actually from the Middle Ages. What he does is he actually tries to resurrect Aristotle's works, the ideas of scientific observation, and tries to not use them to show indifference in faith, which was a growing idea, but to try and show the synthesis of philosophy and faith, right? So he rebirthed Aristotle's work, brings back major areas of intelligence. He also is considered the father of scholasticism, right? Taking these Gothic cathedrals and growing them into that of universities, right? Using the ability to understand God's intelligent design and then try to perceive it the best you can, right? So St. Thomas Aquinas is a major Renaissance thinker, actually. Now, going forward, then we had Francisco Petrarch, right? Considered the father of humanism, considered one of the founders of the Renaissance in 1341, translated Roman texts, studied and analyzed old Latin manuscripts, gave birth to the idea of calling the study of many subjects the liberal arts, right? He's the first one to actually coin the term the Dark Ages when referring to the Middle Ages. So Petrarch is a very, very phenomenal thinker. The other really, really big important thing about him, his most famous work is actually a poem of him climbing to the top of a mountain. When he got up there, the poem kind of wraps itself up when it discusses that he only climbed that mountain just to see the view. That is extremely humanistic when you think about it, because he's not doing it in the pursuit of faith. He's doing it in the pursuit of his own personal experience, right? So, like, humanism, very, very important, like, stuff right there. Oh, he also claims that nobody climbed the top of that mountain since the Romans, which is probably a little aggressive. But, like, so Francisco Petrarch, phenomenally forward thinker, though. And then, of course, you had this guy, Dante. Dante was actually an epic poet, right? He actually wrote his book, The Divine Comedy. Now, The Divine Comedy actually takes the ideas of the afterlife and breaks them up into 3 even sections of an epic poem of over 600 cantos or stanzas, right? So an epic poem, he brings epic literature in the Middle Ages. We will discuss his work tomorrow, right before we get kicked back up into these presentations. And I'll try and take a couple of minutes to explain like why Dante's work of the Divine Comedy and showing the journey and the vision of wandering through hell, purgatory, and paradise was a very, very influential work, right? So we're going to wrap it up there, though. Make sure you get all your stuff written down. Make sure you got all that content. And I will see you guys in a little bit, but then also tomorrow, all right? So y'all have a good one. See you guys later.